Ringo Starr really despised her more than anyone else. Richard Starkey was born on July 7, 1940, in the United States, working-class area of Dingle in Liverpool, England. Rose from very little to become one of the most loved people in the history of popular music. He had a terrible time when he was little. His family had money problems, and he had a lot of health problems as a child. Ringo spent a lot of time in the hospital when he was a kid because he had peritonitis and tuberculosis, which prohibited him from going to school and delayed his schooling. But these hard times made him stronger and gave him a deep appreciation for life. He gained his love for rhythm during those extended hospital stays. He would often drum on tables and bedpans, not understanding that he was laying the groundwork for his future as one of the world's most famous drummers. Ringo performed many different professions before he became famous around the world. He was an apprentice joiner and a machine operator in a factory in Liverpool. But he couldn't stop loving music. He started playing drums with local bands after being inspired by skiffle and early rock and roll. He finally joined Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, one of Liverpool's best bands at the time. He stood out because of his lively drumming style and happy nature. And by 1962, destiny was beckoning. When the Beatles' first drummer, Pete Best, was fired, Ringo was asked to join John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison. His arrival finished the group that would impact music history forever. Ringo Starr was the drummer for the Beatles. He was recognized for his steady, trustworthy beat, his creative fills, and his distinctive sense of time. He didn't always stand out, but his music was an important part of the band's unique sound. He showed off his ability to add modest but strong rhythm work to melodies in songs like Ticket to Ride, Rain, and A Day in the Life. Ringo was a fan favorite not only because he was a great drummer, but also because he was funny and friendly. He also sang on a few Beatles songs, such as With a Little Help from My Friends, Yellow Submarine, and Octopus's Garden. These songs showed off his easygoing personality and childish sense of wonder. Ringo Starr didn't want to slip into the background when the Beatles broke up in 1970. Instead, he started a solo career that showed he was much more than just a drummer in a well-known band. His first two solo albums, Sentimental Journey 1970 and Bouquets of Blues 1970, demonstrated how versatile he was and how much he loved diverse types of music, such pop, country, and jazz standards. His 1973 album Ringo was a huge hit, with tracks like Photograph and Your 16 topping charts all around the world. People really connected with his affable, down-to-earth manner. His collaborations with his old Beatles bandmates showed that they still had a strong bond even after the band broke up. Ringo Starr had a great career in acting and movies in addition to his singing. He was in a number of movies such as Caveman 1981, That'll Be the Day 1973, and The Magic Christian 1969, where he worked with Peter Sears. He was funny and down-to-earth, which made him a great presence on and off screen. He also became a voice actor and narrator for children's TV shows in later years. He is best known for his work on the beloved series Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, which introduced a new generation of fans to his warm, engaging storytelling. Ringo on touring and recording in the years that followed, playing with his all-star band, which was made up of famous artists from different generations who changed every now and again. His concerts turned into happy celebrations of music, camaraderie, and unity. With Beatles tunes mixed in with his own hits and those of his bandmates, his impact as a drummer was growing, and many musicians said he inspired them because of how precise, musical, and understatedly brilliant he was. Queen Elizabeth II named Ringo in 2018 to celebrate his services to music and culture. He became Sir Richard Starkey, an honor long overdue for a man who helped build modern popular music. Ringo Starr's love life shows how crazy it was when he was a world-famous Beatle and how strong love can be even after a long time. His two marriages, first to Maureen Cox and then to Barbara Bach, are quite different parts of his life story, each with its own feelings, problems, and opportunities for progress. Ringo's first wife was Maureen Cox, a hairdresser from Liverpool who was a big fan of the Beatles before she met him. Their tale started in the early 1960s. When Beatlemania was taking over the world, Maureen and Ringo met at the Cavern Club, a well-known subterranean club where the Beatles practiced and formed their first fan base. They met when Maureen was still a teenager, and even though the band was in a lot of trouble, their love for each other blossomed swiftly. Ringo, who was known for being kind and funny, was very drawn to Morin's down-to-earth personality. She didn't see him as just Ringo Starr, the international star. She saw him as Richard Starkey, the man behind the drums. The two got married on February 11, 1965, when the Beatles were at their most famous. The media went crazy over their wedding, and thousands of people gathered outside the registrar office to try to see the newlyweds. The ceremony was private and emotional, with close friends and family there, including Beatles John Lennon and George Harrison. Morin was very faithful and strong during those years. While Ringo toured the world and dealt with the stress of being a superstar, Morin kept their home life in England going, frequently keeping him and their growing family out of the spotlight. Zach, Jason, and Lee Starkey were the couple's 3 children. Later, Zach would follow in his father's footsteps and become a well-known drummer in his own right, playing with famous bands like The Who and Oasis. But as the years went by and the Beatles broke up in 1970, the couple's marriage started to have big problems. Fame, long absences, and the temptations of the rock and roll lifestyle all had an effect. Ringo himself has said that things were hard for him during this time because he drank too much and lived a crazy, wild life after the Beatles broke up. Morin tried to keep the family together, but their connection grew more and more distant. Their marriage dissolved in 1975, but they stayed in touch through their kids and respect for one another. Sadly, Morin Cox died of leukemia in 1994 at the age of 48. Ringo was quite sad about her passing because he was with her in her last days. Later, he claimed that she was one of the most real and caring women he had ever met. A real aspect of his life that he would always remember. Ringo found love again with Barbara Bach, an actress and model best remembered for her performance as the Bond girl Anna Amasova in the 1977 James Bond film The Spy Who Loved Me. This came after years of soul-searching and personal growth. The two met in 1980 while working on the adventure comedy movie Caveman, in which they both had roles. There was an instant and palpable spark between them. Ringo subsequently said that their meeting was love at first sight. He said that Barbara gave peace, grace, and emotional stability to his life, which was very different from how things had been in the past. Their relationship grew swiftly, and they got married on April 27, 1981, in a grand ceremony at Marylebone Town Hall in London. This was the same venue where Paul McCartney had married Linda Eastman more than 10 years before. Friends, relatives, and other musicians came together to celebrate the marriage of two people who had found comfort and happiness in one another. Barbara had a big impact on Ringo's ability to deal with his addiction problems. Ringo and Barbara went to rehab together in the late 1980s, and that revolutionized their life. Ringo often says that Barbara saved him both mentally and physically. He says that her love and support helped him get sober and stable. Their marriage has been one of the longest lasting and most respected in the entertainment world for many years. Even though they are famous, Ringo and Barbara have made a tranquil and meaningful existence together. They share their time between houses in England, Monaco, and Los Angeles. They are noted for their mutual interest in helping people, especially with programs that help people recover from addiction and safeguard the environment. Barbara and Ringo are also very committed to peace and love, which is something Ringo often shows through his art and music. People have always thought of the Beatles as the best example of musical brotherhood. 4 young men from Liverpool who made the world a better place. But behind the success and unity that drew in millions, there were often tensions inside the band, some of which were deeper than the public knew. Ringo Starr looked up to and revered George Harrison, the quiet Beatle. They played together as the group rose to fame, but as time went on, personal insults, jealousy, and treachery started to get in the way of their friendship. Ringo subsequently said that he had more animosity toward George than anyone else in his life. Ringo once said, "George was like a brother to me, but brothers can battle harder than adversaries ever do." Those comments held years of unacknowledged stress. People typically thought of Ringo as the Beatles' peacekeeper, but his placid demeanor hid the anger that had built up over the years of their fame. Ringo was the last person to join the band, taking Pete Best's place in 1962. He rapidly became quite famous. George, who had been with John Lennon and Paul McCartney from the start, often regarded Ringo like an outsider. He wasn't cruel, but he acted like he was better than Ringo because he had been there first. Ringo remembered that George could be distant. He had his own world and his own spirituality. And sometimes he made me feel like I didn't belong there. The stress got so bad during the later Beatles years that personal egos and creative goals started to tear the band apart. George wanted people to know how good he was at writing songs, but he felt like Lennon and McCartney were getting all the attention. Ringo, on the other hand, had a hard time fitting in with a band where his musical contributions were generally ignored. Ringo said that there were days when he didn't even want to go to the studio. George and I hardly ever looked at each other. I didn't want to feel invisible anymore. The stress was well shown in the 1969 movie Let It Be. Ringo couldn't stand the strain, so he would go without saying anything. But what really broke Ringo's love for George happened later, when their personal lives became mixed up. George had a short love relationship with Ringo's then-wife, Maureen Starkey. In the early 1970s, the news hit Ringo like a bolt of lightning. Even though George was also married to Pattie Boyd at the time, he said years later that he felt betrayed. There was more to it than just a woman. It was about faith. It was about a family member crossing a line that can't be crossed. Ringo's affair with George was one of the worst things that ever happened to him. It made him very angry at George for years. I hated him for what he did, Ringo stated without any hesitation. I really did. It wasn't anger that faded away fast. It stayed with me for a very long time. George later admitted he was wrong, although not necessarily in the most sincere way. When asked about it, he is said to have told Ringo, "Well, you know, all things must pass." The comment, which was a reference to his own record title, made Ringo very angry since he thought it was a heartless way to say that the damage was done. People who knew the Beatles well have reported that Ringo stayed away from George for months after the affair came to light. When they did see one another again, their chats were unpleasant and superficial. Ringo said, "It wasn't like we could just pick up a guitar and a drumstick and make it all better. Music didn't cure that wound." But with time, Ringo's deep spirituality and forgiving nature began to show. He thought about what friendship meant and how useless it was to keep anger as the years went by. In the late 1990s, when George got cancer, Ringo went to see him at the hospital and forgot all about his anger. "I told him I loved him," Ringo said softly. "After everything that happened, I knew that love was stronger than hate. I didn't want to go to the next world with that grief still between us." George is said to have grinned and taken his hand, and for a short while, all the years of stress went away. Ringo was one of the first people to talk about his friend George Harrison after he died in 2001. He added, "George was my brother, through tears. I might have loathed him at one point, but I never stopped loving him." That confession showed how complicated their relationship was, with strong feelings, human foibles, and, in the end, an unbreakable link made through music and shared history. Ringo Starr's story with George Harrison is a reminder that even among famous people, love and hate can live together. There was a camaraderie behind every harmony sung and every drum beat performed that had been tested by fame, betrayal, and time. A friendship that lasted till the last note, even if it had its ups and downs.